Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 434 featuring Michelle Munson, who is the CEO and co-founder of Eluvio, at a fascinating company, which is a Web3 company, Web3 distribution company for the film industry and much more, any kind of content, really. Fascinating stuff. I actually got to meet her at the Hollywood Professional Association back in the springtime, but I wasn't able to get time with her until much more recently and record this podcast, which I was really looking forward to. What is Eluvio? It is, as I mentioned, a content distribution platform under a Web3 availability or a Web3 umbrella, and really, really interesting. Lots of things that you can do. Michelle is a fascinating person, very, very bright person. And in fact, I will give you guys a fair warning. This is a fairly, very technical conversation that I had with her, especially around the areas of how Web3 and networking and distribution works. She was actually, back in the day, she was one of the founders of Aspera that she later sold to IBM. And it was really interesting to see that history a little bit as well. So it was really cool to see this. They've actually done some incredible NFT packages in partnership with Warner Brothers for the Lord of the Rings package, as well as for the new Superman 1978 version that was done more recently. Really interesting to see her thoughts on that, especially in the NFT bubble and how she fits within that area. It's really think about it more, especially in the two examples that I gave with Warner Brothers. Think of it more as a very sophisticated digital version of a box set that you would get, like a box set or DVD, Blu-rays, things of that nature, except this all lives within the cloud or within Web3 encrypted blockchain, which is possible through their Content Fabric Protocol. And it's really kind of cool because you think about ownerships of digital content, and that's kind of something we get into and talk about as well. So really cool conversation around that. We also even talk about what this means in terms of residuals for writers, for example, and in light of the strikes, this is kind of an interesting way of thinking about things as well. So fascinating to have her on. I would really appreciate all of the input and all the ideas that she has. So it's really good to see that. Okay, we have one big announcement that I'm very excited about. Vantage 2.0 is out. I could not be more excited. It is a great, great product. For those of you who don't know what Vantage is our real-time ray tracing solution that works with V-Ray. Basically, you output V-Ray scene files, and you can use Vantage to view them in real time, fully ray traced, no rasterization. And this is taking advantage of both what we're doing with V-Ray as well as DXR. So really, really interesting thing to do. Now, what is new in Vantage 2? Well, we've got a whole bunch of new things. We've got scene states that can be added. We've basically got more native control of lights where you can create and control lights more directly within Vantage. We have HDR support for HDR monitors, which is really exciting. We also have the ability to support deforming meshes, which is very exciting. We have render elements that you can render, multi-UV channel, which is was a big request in the original Vantage, and the new NVIDIA upscaler and denoiser has been added, and a lot of things. And another big one that you guys may be surprised by, yes, we now support AMD GPUs. If those AMD GPUs support DXR, we will be able to use those AMD GPUs. So the very exciting for you guys who own AMD GPUs, you will be able to check out Vantage. Really, really cool stuff. Okay, and honestly speaking, this is a real game changer, especially for things like previs and play blasts of any kind, because of the way you can live link with Maya or Max or Houdini, whatever, inside of Vantage and create these really great play blasts natively within Vantage. Is really, really cool. And you can do all kinds of stuff with that. So definitely go check it out. Again, go to chaos.com to check out this, where all these new products are announced. And Vantage 2 is a really great one. We have a bunch of videos on the subject and a whole lot more advantages that have been and features that have been added to it. So very exciting. Okay, we have one announcement or two announcements that are coming up real soon, and that is that we are going to be in Australia. So if you are in Melbourne, you will be able to see us on July 13th. And if you are in Sydney, we'll be able to see us on July 18th. And this is brought to you by Digitor and Storm Effects. And we are very excited about that. We're going to do a deep dive into the ArcViz landscape today and see where things have changed and have that conversation. So you can go to chaos.com/event to get all the news on that. So again, that is chaos.com/events. Now, if you want to know more about the podcast, of course, you can just go to chaos.com/CG Garage Podcast. You can also follow us on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast. And of course, you can always watch us. We would love to see you. And that is at youtube.com/Chaos Group TV, where all of our videos are, including the podcast. And of course, if you have any ideas or suggestions about the podcast, we've gotten some great ones recently. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us, labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 434 with Michelle Munson.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
I was very interested in talking to you after I went to HPA, because I was like, oh, hold on a second. Because I did a lot of research on Web3 stuff last few years. And I was saying you're holding strong. That's the number one thing. And you've got some very interesting ideas that's happening. And you have some incredibly interesting experience to back up all of that, all of your knowledge. So I'm very interested to pick your brain on that. But before we start, let's sort of give everyone a little bit of background on yourself. You obviously have an interest in software engineering and have been doing that. Where did that all start? Where did your interest in computers and software engineering start?
Oh, sure. Well, hey, Chris, thanks again for having me. This is sort of a kind of a lifetime thing for me. I studied engineering in college and grad school, electrical engineering and physics as an undergrad, computer science and for my master's. I left my PhD like a lot of people, moved to the Bay Area, fell in with a bunch of people at UC Berkeley and got in the startup craze that really launched streaming on the internet, honestly. Right. And I know how old I am. I started working in about 2000, a little before that. And that was my first startup, started by a professor at UC Berkeley. I was a software engineer, and we were making the first overlay multicast networks to deliver content before streaming was really possible. And
right.
The kind of meltdowns that would happen back in those days were hilarious, because they would be like with very small numbers of people, even though the internet was supposed to be this very capable mechanism for delivering all this content. And then on top of it, the audiences would also not be very big. It was well before anything was mainstream. So that was my beginning. And I also would say on the other side, I fell in love with the internet like a lot of people when I encountered it. I'm actually a farm kid. I grew up in Kansas, and my father, who just passed away, unfortunately, this year, was 80 years old, was a sixth generation. My generation is seventh generation Kansas farm family. And my mom was a professor at the university in textiles. So nobody in exactly what I did. But the reason I'm saying all this is because the internet really started to become mainstream when I was graduating from college. And I just fell in love with it as what the web seemed to be in terms of unlocking information for everybody. And I recall, this is kind of a funny story. It was my energy conversion class of all things. The professor said, go to Netscape and write end of class paper on some topic around energy conversion. And of course, I wrote the paper, but what I was more fascinated with was doing all the research.
Was Netscape.
For the first time, exactly. And I decided that I was going to kind of shift from EE and physics, or much more on the lower level side, obviously. And I decided to shift to computer science for grad school. I had to really scramble to get my coding skills to a point that they were good enough for professional work out here in the Valley. And in the end, my sort of appetite for creating new things and sort of looking across disciplines gave me a lot of options. And I think drive to, build my first company, Aspera, which is equally interesting in content, but a thing of its time. It's a high-speed file transfer protocol
Yep.
for
Very familiar with it.
yeah, reliable data transfer. I actually invented that along with one of my colleagues when I was 30 years old. It's a long story as to how I came up with this idea, but that was my first foray, and then built that company very naively, but fortunately successfully sold it to IBM, which is a whole nother chapter.
Right.
We'll have a podcast about that one day.
Yeah, but I'm curious about that because obviously this is
And then
such
part of this,
an important part of what you've done is being able to figure out how to transfer huge amounts of data over different
yeah,
protocols.
definitely. But one thing I do want to say is Eluvio is something entirely different. It's a fully decentralized approach to the whole problem space. And it has many ideas from Shaban and some of my other colleagues. It's a much wider and bigger technology than Aspera FASP. FASP was a bulk data transfer technology. So in that way,
Absolutely.
they're kind of two different chapters. But to your point, yes, I did have a special interest. And so I have like many people, I have a set of core colleagues I've worked with for a long time, and we're all really quite interested in what you can do in application protocols to be able to solve the problems of content over the internet. And the reason we think content's so interesting is it's the hard stuff. All right. First of all, it makes up most of the internet traffic. Everybody knows that video is virtually all the bytes that flow over the internet.
Sure.
And it's also such an integral part of the applications of the internet. I mean, everything we consider media or valuable data is large form content. And that's been really something that's driven my interest all the way through my entire career. And the long story short about Eluvio is that because of all my exposure through Aspera and Shaban, Lucas, Michael, the other people that helped get this thing off the ground, to the supply chain of what was going on with video, the CDNs, we had to integrate Aspera into the CDNs. Honestly, we thought this is really terrible. I mean, what people are going through is so restrictive in terms of the architecture, and it hasn't changed in 20 years. Like literally my entire, career since graduate school, same CDNs, and then the clouds came along and did a certain thing to large form content, real-time video. And we had the idea that, maybe we could really make a dent on this in a big way. And then we also fell in love with blockchains because of all their fantastic properties and decided to make the content fabric a blockchain. So, I mean, it's a whole cloth invention from the ground up for decentralized large form content, storage, distribution, streaming, ownership. Personally speaking, because I've been around this stuff for a long time, I'm really motivated to have an impact societally with this so that it can economically really unlock the efficiencies of utility network. I really care about that. And so I've spent a lot of time on this, working the ecosystem and, making sure that the applications we're bringing out resonate with the consumer, right? Which isn't always easy. Tomorrow we're doing Superman, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And I'm sitting here trying to finish all the details for that. So
Yep. I was told about that. I was going to get to that, but I want to sort of help the audience a little bit because our audience can be very technical and some of them cannot be so technical, but I want to help them a little bit through that. And we talked about obviously, you fell in love with Web 1, right? Which is what I fell in love with.
Web 2, and now Web 3.
Web 3, right? Exactly. So I was definitely sort of enamored, like, what does this all mean when all this data was on there? And I was using the internet before I knew it was called the internet. When I was, it was just EDUs before .com. And I was sort of interested about how we could transfer data from place to place, and that was kind of a fascinating thing. And just the idea of FTP was cool to me, And Aspera is obviously a very fancy FTP. You could say it in a very interesting way. But the idea of decentralized has always been sort of something that has been part of the internet that we've talked about in some ways. And so somehow Web 2 turned into a highly centralized, highly walled garden system. What do you think caused that?
Well, first of all, I don't know that I'm the authority on this, but I certainly have a point of view from what the career that I've lived. I think two big factors. Big factor number one is just the nature of the state of the art and the technology. The internet during that era was really only mature and capable of creating sort of like these verticalized sort of application stacks. And that's the reason we ended up with that. Second was the economic forces. There is no doubt that all of the, massive wealth engine that has driven the internet came from certain sort of breakthrough applications, like search, for example,
Sure.
and then some, to a certain degree, streaming video, right? Netflix, for example, arguably then drove some infrastructure sort of contributions like cloud computing, which really and then of course the Apple ecosystem, the device ecosystem, the personal device ecosystem, right? All of those, economically also favored or doubled down, continued to leverage a centralized model. And then the social data side just kind of blew it all up. And you put that together and I think you end up with a combination. What I'm basically saying is, here's the nature of the technology and its maturity at the time that really led to these verticalized approaches, which then, given the economics, started to double down on themselves and just become stronger and more centralized, if you will, in architecture. And by the way, centralized architectures are just easier. Right? The reality is, if you get down to it, that you need certain things to be true to do what we're doing now in the content fabric. For one, which has nothing to do with blockchains, compute had to get really cheap. It just really had to go down in cost, right? That's number one. And just to change the balance of whether a decentralized architecture could really start to, with the right software, could really start to substitute for a more, sort of classical design. I think the second thing, right, that's maybe on the push side. On the pull side, also, I think that along with that, what we're seeing in Web3 is also a function of the times. People's appetite, the pull from society has changed to the point that people's values have started to align more with decentralized freedom due to what the sort of experience has been with particularly the use of people's personal data. And of course, if you take a really, on the blockchain side, you take the view of people that are in decentralized finance heavily. I mean, the point of view there is similar, that we really should be free of institutional, intermediaries for, just control. And so I think it's a combination of what's possible in the times, and also the demand from people, both of which shape each other. One thing else I would like to say about the shift that's occurred that would sort of open up, to your point, the transition from Web 2 to Web 3 is the fact that we are at what I would call sort of generation, at least 2+, maybe generation 3 in video technology. And that's something that's very specific to our domain as video engineers, which is that we've been doing video since I, was in grad school. And the first wave of that was barely to get streaming to work. The second wave was to get streaming to scale, but brute force. And if you get into the kind of video technology that we've created with the content fabric, then to be able to sort of unlock that for a new type of content native sort of distribution that's much more efficient and also much more flexible in terms of what it can do. And from the technical side, as all things, innovation has to go along at a evolutionary path. I mean, what was done before makes possible the discoveries of the next wave, and we are definitely enabled by the limitations of what has been, right? And so that's, I think, a particular factor of the content fabric. And then there's a lot to say about the timing now for blockchains. Blockchains as technology have become mature, and that also provides a gateway to thinking about state in large-scale distributed systems differently than we did in Web 2. And to your question, one of the hallmarks of the previous generation that kept these very centralized kinds of architectures was that there weren't really great the best that we did in that generation was distributed databases. We certainly didn't advance to the point of decentralized data. right? And that has a lot of limitations in terms of how you can get throughput, how you can get consistency. I mean, there's the classic CAP theorem, right, which defines the trade-offs between the availability of data and the basically capacity and throughput, right? So
yeah,
well,
absolutely.
consistency, right? I should say.
Sure. But let's give people a little bit of an overview as to what Eluvio does. So give us an idea, because obviously there's been a lot of sort of Web3 companies that have come along and have tried to present themselves as a Web3 studio or this or whatever it happens to be, or platform, or the way that they've presented themselves over time. But what is your idea that's around what you guys provide?
Well, first and foremost, we started this from your questions, Chris, looking at what would be the needs of content over the internet, not so much Web3 specifically, right?
Right.
And the whole idea for the fabric is to really make possible video and other large form content at scale, so that it would be cheap enough for anybody to be able to distribute their own content, that the internet at large could actually scale with it, and that we're not duplicating so much of the core bandwidth use that's going on, and we can actually scale that. And then thirdly, we can make possible the creative ranges that people would like to have through the dynamic nature of being able to have programmable media. Those are all the things that Fabric's really about. Next generation of video and interactive content over the internet, enabling creators.
And that's doing it on your own platform where you're not tied to YouTube or whatever, right?
Doing it as a decentralized protocol that's open, that runs on a network of nodes, that is infinitely extensible, meaning it can get as big as necessary in terms of the number of nodes and the amount of content. And also that is so efficient, so good at what it does, that it delivers premium quality, really high quality, but does it at a cost point that opens up the possibilities for, kinds of distributions that don't have to have really big audiences to still make money, right? That's the whole premise of the content fabric. And then to your point, right, when you start to layer on Web3, I mean, one of the key tenets of blockchains is that there's native provenance, right? If you are on the blockchain, you own your data, you own what you've published. One of the things the Fabric has done that has never been done before in content is give a blockchain lifecycle to the content ownership, meaning that when you publish content into the Fabric, you actually cryptographically own it due to the encryption and the base of that from your blockchain keys. And then the encryption algorithm end-to-end ensures that anybody who's playing out some derivative of it or accessing some derivative is not only authorized through its contract, they're getting the version that's been recorded in that contract, so it can't be tampered with. And then finally, the cryptography just re-encrypts it for them, meaning that someone can't pretend to be them and get access, or it can't be stolen, right? And that whole cycle is something that's never existed before. It goes along with the efficiency to say, hey, we can really have a creator economy for the first time. Big publisher, small publisher, you can self-publish your content. You can do it with integrity and with ownership control. Somebody else can be your audience, and they can also share in the ownership. None of that can be compromised. And then finally, you take out the middle parties, so you make it much more efficient to do, right? That's where the blockchain side comes in. And as far as what we've been doing with it, fortunately, content providers are figuring that out. And we have some really fantastic projects. I mean, it's still relatively early days, but I mean, you caught me on this day. We're launching our second major Web3 movie.
Right.
Superman tomorrow.
I know. And by the time this comes out, it'll be out. So which is great.
So,
but the one I remember,
that makes sense, right?
The one I remembered you presenting at HPA was the Lord of the Rings one, right?
Yeah, Lord of the Rings was the first one that we did in this format. And so to be clear, we don't make the creative work. The Eluvio Content Fabric as a blockchain platform provides the storage, serving, streaming, authorization, tokenization of the content. Warner Brothers, in this case, makes everything and owns everything.
Sure.
And then the point of these kinds of experiences is to, number one, unlock something all new for the fan, right? These
Sure.
things have a unique format. They are NFTs and they're all bundled together. They have interactive content and full-length movie and all that. The other is also to give people the opportunity to engage continuously with their ownership. I mean, they own these NFTs that then become utility entitlement to new unlockable content. And the Fabric works really well for enabling those things. So it's a new vehicle for creativity.
Right. But just to give you an example, if I'm going to buy, the Lord of the Rings, a Lord of the Rings NFT, it does come with the actual movie, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The NFTs don't always come with that.
No, and what's important is it isn't just like it's an NFT unlock. The actual, this is what I was saying. I know it gets really heavy and it sounds like, oh, geez, will she ever stop talking about this?
Yeah.
But it's really, really, really important that the encryption and provenance of the content actually have an on-chain mechanism. And that's what the Content Fabric Protocol does. So when you own the token, you're not just getting this unlock to some Web2 hosted content that someone else can take or that, can be basically repurposed some other way. Instead, what you're getting is direct authorization to the content objects through the blockchain, which does all of its decryption and encryption for you, all that DRM under the control of the blockchain contracts for the object. That's the actual bundle, if you will. There's a content object for the whole bundle. And then also the other thing is when you go and do something with what you had NFT and that media experience, it's a meaningful transfer of ownership to the other party, meaning they're getting whatever that NFT, whatever rights it gives to the content that's associated. And lastly, it's also extremely flexible. And one of the great things I feel is not only does it encode provenance and let you really sell, it also lets you do new things. And you've seen there's interactive experiences that are hosted in this way as lots of bonus footage, new stuff added on. There's a new feature that will be part of this that's been advertised, so I can talk about it. Everybody's been talking about utility with NFTs. Well, these, the Superman bundles, their NFTs include redeemable offers, which let you then go have a free claim to the DC Comics NFTs that are available through another project with Warner Brothers. And that's not just a sort of ticket kind of thing. There's an actual on-chain transaction for that redemption that's part of your NFT, and only you and only you can get it, right? So
right. Yeah, and I think that's interesting. And obviously, these were things that were talked about a great deal during the height of the NFT, boom. But that hype has sort of come down quite a bit. And I know you're well aware of that. So what caused that change of reaction towards the NFTs at that time? And how do you feel that I know obviously what you guys have in terms of the protocol is very different than anything else I've been talking about, right? But what do you think caused sort of like, oh, I'm supposed to get all this ownership in NFTs, and all of a sudden all of that hype sort of like fizzled out in the last few years? But what caused that, and what do you think makes what your guys are doing different than that?
Well, it's really hard when you work in engineering all day long of your life for 20 years to not be smug and say that a lot of stuff just isn't real.
Right.
That's the truth. There's a lot of stuff that's just hype. And I think there's a layer of that in response to what you are asking about, which is just because of the bubble, people were throwing themselves in and offering things and making things that were unsound or didn't really exist, or couldn't do very much, right? Or all of the above, right? Or were risky and all of that. So that's fallen away because there isn't the bubble to prop that stuff up and whatnot, right? I think the second factor also that goes along with your question is just the natural maturation of new technology, right? Which is that inevitably, that's where innovation bubbles always, books say this, and what I've experienced, 2000 was the same way. There is this period of time where a lot of people are trying to use the technology superficially, right? It's not there yet in terms of most implementations or use cases. And so it gets, that anticipation and hype, and then it falls off, right? And I think the difference, what I'm trying to say here is that this is a substantial technology that does the functions that we're trying to achieve, which I think actually have real value. And then the rest is really having the opportunity to work with good use cases that make sense, that can allow people to start to enjoy the applications and whatnot. So one thing that's going on right now is a lot of experimentation around being able to offer new content in combination for formats like this, to look at what would the consumer really like to have in terms of exclusive offers, and then also to see how far that you would, as a creative IP owner, you would like your users to participate in co-owners, right? Sure. And I think those things are all being tested by small and big creators. And one thing I wanted to say is, just as an example, while we're launching Superman tomorrow with a major Hollywood studio, at the same time, last Saturday night, we hosted a live streaming show on the platform for, I didn't know the singer myself, but Pi Sonark. They have a series and they did a terrific job. And that was to a small audience. It's a totally independent sort of event, sure. Right? And what I'm trying to say here is that I think when the true applications of the technology are able to actually exploit it, right? That's when you have that staying power that you're asking about, that allows the tech to really work for people. Lastly, right. Is ease of use. That's one more thing I wanted to say. And
I was going to get to that. So let's get to that in a little bit. But before we get to that real quick, and first of all, I want to say is I do believe you have something very special. And I do believe that you have something that's a little different, which I wouldn't be talking to you right now.
Thank you.
But I also think that there's something, that is hard for people, and that must be, and I'm wondering how, if you talk to the average person right now and you tell them about NFTs, it sounds like something you shouldn't trust, right?
Oh, well, definitely. And I mean, having seen what people have seen at the crypto markets, and particularly the FTX collapse, which terrified right. the world. I mean, how right. could you think anything but that, right?
Right.
And that's where I think, and even today, this morning, Bloomberg, Brian Roberts, who's the head of Coinbase, is sitting there in his blue suit being interviewed about the fact the SEC is suing Coinbase. I mean, right. we have a disastrous confusion in the United States in particular about blockchain technology and the soundness of what it can do versus the this sort of, I think, very what's the best way to put it, sort of thin veneer around crypto investing that right. has been, unfortunately, led us into a place where a lot of terrific, solid projects and companies are not able to actually do what they need to do. I think that's going to change, to your point. And then as far as non-fungible tokens go, really, if you get down to the technology, it's a great instrument for ownership. The idea of a collectible that you're going to flip as some kind of digital real estate, right, is no different than the housing bubble, where you're going to sure. flip a house, right? It's as fake as that, right? And people right. know this, I think, instinctively. That's why I feel that even though, yes, it's NFTs have gotten a bad name, I think over time, the sense of people, as they see these solid use cases like what we're doing, will come through. Right. And we sure. will move past this. So, but I do think, to my earlier comments, we have to get a deeper and more sound understanding of blockchain technology, particularly in the United States, so that we're not holding back healthy and strong innovation in the process of trying to remove the fraud and
Sure. Sure. I think absolutely is true, but I think there is been a bit of a veil that's been put over things, and there's incentive by large institutions to make sure that we don't trust blockchains, because that would disrupt their banking systems or their entertainment systems or whatever
Although,
else.
although I think it's much less than people think. I think this is just pure ignorance. I really feel I really do mean that. I mean,
Yeah.
I've worked in the mainstream of technology my entire career. I think
Right.
many fantastic companies fully understand what blockchain technology can do. And also I think many, consumers either could, right, or do, right. And that's where I think where we really have to just get the facts through, and that also to your point that there's a small. I mean, I'm always trying to think positively about leadership, but there I think are a lot of even regulatory leaders and people in Congress that have much greater sense than the sort of um, insanity of Gary Gensler, for example.
Yeah. It's been very hard to listen to congressional hearings about technology. It's just painful. But okay, let's get to a little bit in terms of, I want to think about what you guys are doing from 2 points of view. And I want to start from the point of view of someone who's going to purchase an NFT or purchase a system, right?
Yeah.
And so ownership of that thing. I mean, one thing that I have been frustrated with in terms of my content is that, right now a lot of my content comes from streaming net services, and or even quote unquote purchasing them on either Apple or Amazon or whatever, right? And that purchase is so not guaranteed that I still own that thing, and also because of the way that licensing is being, screwed around with by the entertainment industry. One movie that I was watching today may not be there tomorrow, and it happens all the time, right? So I've heard of a lot of people who are saying it's time to get back to Blu-rays because at least I own something physical. So how does what you do
relate
provide?
to that? Right,
relate to
so
that.
I maybe getting back to Blu-rays is a little bit of a sad gimmick, right? I don't think that's what people are really looking for. We've sort of outgrown this, but to your point, ownership is something that I think does mean something to people, your data and your media and your content. It also means something on the publisher side. One thing I did not understand deeply as I do now is that the IP holders, whether they are, just in large intermediary or they're the original IP holders, their business depends upon preserving the value and extending the value of that, right? And I think on both sides, you have an opportunity with this kind of what's called, electronic sell-through that is new, that's meaningful in a digital way, that can be done as a lean-back experience rather than just something that feels like an NFT hooked onto a movie, right? And also, finally, I think it's the first time we've seen the insert of a change. And what you asked at the very beginning, that is, number one, the relationship between the user and the content they're enjoying, right? They can actually participate, own. They could even have their contributions go back into projects they care about, vice versa. They can get benefits from things, even if they're just commercial, right? They can really control that relationship for the first time, 20 years, and have some meaning in that. It's been passive streaming for all of the time off of the Costco shelf, if you will. No offense to Costco, but that's basically how it's been, right? So that goes away. And the other side, which I do know well, and I did going into this because of Aspera, is that the content publishers, both the original owners and then also the publishers themselves, can achieve much greater profitability because they don't have, first of all, it's a much more efficient way to distribute, right? Both in terms of the utility network, you take away like 50 times the cost of CDN and AWS, right? And you also keep the revenue, right? And you put those two things together and you can start to change. It's no secret that the content publishers, large and small, have really struggled to be profitable, right? There's tons of streaming going on. It's just people aren't making money at it, right? At least not very many. So, and so I think the value points here are really to make that relationship direct, get it really efficient, unlock, the good things about ownership, start to, like you said, make it possible to try to, make the most of engagement where the fan or the owner is actually invested into what's what they're getting, right? And then to
Right.
also unlock the efficiency of this new kind of creative distribution. And I am really excited because thanks to these new formats, I'm having conversations with people just talking about all kinds of experiments that they want to do in terms of new ways of reaching their fans and users. And I think it has tapped a new potential in the what we think of as you can call it the creative economy, but the media industry.
Okay. Now there's, right now, as you know, there's a strike going on.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Right. And so that's been disrupted a lot in the entertainment industry. And one of the big problems that people have, which I think is residuals, and how do content creators and IP holders and writers get part of the economy
Absolutely.
for what they're doing. So
Yeah.
it seems to me that built into your system,
Yeah, that's
everyone
right.
can get a piece of the pie.
That's right. But also tying back to one of your previous questions, there's been all this promise that we're going to have royalty settlements on chain, that we're going to be able to have distributed payments on chain, right?
Sure.
That's been claimed by the blockchain community for the last 5 years. How many times have people stood up and said they're making a company that's going to do this, right? The
Right.
reality is the tech to do that really well, it's deep and takes a while, right?
Right.
I think the great thing here is that absolutely. That's the whole point of what we're doing here at Eluvio in terms of the upstream side of content ownership and payments distribution. And at NAB this year, after 4.5 years of working hard on this, we now have the full stack that allows us to compensate any number of stakeholders when a content offering is sold, authorized as a token on chain, non-fungible token, for example, right? And to have that settlement happen instantly through a contract, right? What that does to fix the problems you're talking about is it gives you real technical means to scale it up, right? You can have any number of people involved. You don't have to pay for extra systems to do it. And then everybody gets their settlement at the time. So there's no chasing down what you're owed, and it's fully transparent. Right. This is the first point in time in history that I know of where all of the ingredients are there to really do it. Right. Which is, getting to your point about why hasn't this happened in the internet before? Well, number one is it just couldn't be done yet, right?
Sure.
Technologically, right? The second thing then is, I think to your point is, what is going to be the path to have that really scale up, really happen, go in, have the supply chain actually adopt it? I think we're at the beginning of phases of them doing that, right? It will take a very long time to get fully, adopted in real terms, but the goods are there. And then the second thing I feel that's really important about this is, yes, there are going to be some of these sort of, black curtains that are going to be opened up, where some points in the supply chain that have basically been around for a long time because they haven't been exposed as being wasteful, inefficient, or in some cases even, sort of fraudulent in keeping people's due monies, right? Those are going to fall away, but they're going to fall away systemically, right? They're going to fall away because it can be done better, more efficiently, and faster this way, right? And I think that's the real change in this whole problem of the royalties or getting compensation to creators and whatnot. I don't think it's going to happen top down ever. That's my feeling, right?
Right. But let's talk about that content, because obviously, if I look at one of the Lord of the Rings NFTs right now, they're not cheap.
No, but they're also not more than a bundled sort of special, right? $100 for the top thing, $30 for the standard, right?
Sure. But it's not like I'm just paying my $15 a month to Netflix and I get whatever.
But the same technology, this is something I was going to say. So
yeah.
the very same technology can allow you to have a subscription authorization to a bundle or an unlimited set of content, right?
Okay.
So that's what I was trying to say is you don't have to just create collector's bundles and mint those as a single NFT in the case, and again, without this.
So you could start your own Netflix through this platform.
Absolutely. And and some of the projects we're working on are doing things just like that, right?
Right.
And I think this is extremely important, right? You asked about, why does it matter to really have the provenance and ownership of the content and its, serving to be on chain? Well, that makes possible any kind of ownership model, whether it's
Right.
owning it or unlocking it once, getting it for a certain time window, having an indefinite subscription, applying the ownership to a whole set of content, you name it. So the presentation can look just like another Netflix, another video store, or it can be something brand new that's like a whole bundle that you can own, like the
Right.
Lord of the Rings and the Superman NFTs, right?
But I'm curious, because I'm sure
With
Netflix.
music, by the way, I forgot to mention that. I mean, this applies to music.
I know. Well, music. We'll get to music in a second, but I just want to stick to I saw some of the graphs on your thing. It's like this storage. I mean, Netflix pays a huge amount of money to AWS for their storage. I'm sure their bill for
Well,
AWS is
Netflix actually built their own. They have their open caching protocol CDN that they built themselves on their second generation to kind of break away from that, right? And
Right.
That's one of the reasons to innovate. The next step is that
Right.
has its own limitations, right?
Sure. So, but have you talked to some of those networks like, hey, you can use us as a system as a platform?
Well, suffice to say, I mean, if you build something like we're building, people in the space to come to us and ask
Sure.
for those things, right? I think the key, though, when you look at the content fabric, is the end state isn't so much to replace just the infrastructure underneath that existing centralized model.
But the
It's to make
ecosystem itself.
possible direct distribution.
Right.
So what the fabric really changes in the long, I mean, of course you can use it in that way and it's efficient and works well. But the real change, I think, to what you've been asking about is that if you own the content or if you are creating the content and you own the content, right? Or you're a set of parties doing that, you can now use this to distribute directly. You don't need to set up a licensing business with this intermediary. And you are a consumer, you can just show up and pick what you want. Right. Under which terms you want it, right? That's the real disruption in this that moves us past the last 20 years of passive, OTT streaming, in my opinion.
Right. Well, what about that last problem? Because having your own distribution is not necessarily that's not the only problem, right? Like you want discoverability. You want people to see.
Exactly.
Right. So like when I put a video up on YouTube, if I get 22 views, that's because YouTube is not promoting it, right? But if somehow, for some magical reason, YouTube decides to push it to people, then all of a sudden get 3,000 views.
Get 3,000 people watching it.
Right. And so how do you change it? What is the discoverability? And also, like you mentioned before, you don't necessarily have a huge amount of people looking at your stuff, but you're getting more value out of every person.
Yeah. So, I mean, you asked the most important question of all, right? The whole reason the social advertising business has grown and kept hold on all the creative economy is because it dictates the discoverability.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So
people try to gain it all the time. That's
the only way to really change that game, right, is to turn that on its head, right?
Right.
So I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail in sort of, explaining what we think the future of this is. But I think the starting point of it is just what you see us doing, right? There's a couple of pieces. Piece one is there are some brands that, have their own discoverability because they're strong enough on their own that they don't need another portal, right? So those are the big guys. And then I think the second point, right, to sort of tease into the question that you asked, which is, so how do you get people able to find the long tail of everything else, or even want to go find the long tail of everything else? Our view is that you need to tap into what is inherently different about this cycle. And you said it in your last question. Ownership.
Right.
Why are people differently motivated when they, in this way, right, to discover? And what sort of cycle of motivation could you tap into that's different? It's that in this sort of ownership world, you're more intrinsically motivated because you own the thing, or you want to own the thing, or you want to identify with the thing, right?
Right.
So we think the way to drive discoverability is to utilize the blockchain primitives to help to amplify the benefits of ownership. And there are several things, without getting a lot of details, that we think are part of that stack, that, you will see future things from us that exploits, right?
Sure.
Toward that idea, right? Now, nobody's ever successfully done this yet. Everything has been kind of like locked over in social media land, right? But nobody's ever before had the confluence of factors to kind of put it all together. So this is where, I think we and our partners are really concentrated, is if you can really get the content distribution happening, then what steps do you take to really reinforce the incentives around, the natural incentives around ownership that then drive more and more people to want to look there, as opposed to being, just in the passive ad consumption world, right? I think that's really the key.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. You said that. I was
The
actually
brands
thinking
are
about.
part of this, by the way. Oh, I wanted to say one more thing.
Yeah.
It's not like advertising shouldn't be there. It's that something different. Again, brand identity is also like content identity, meaning that people that like to identify with the things that they like, right? And so if one can amplify that natural allegiance, right, with the blockchain relationship, and you can imagine ways you might do that, it also becomes a new way for the brands, the content, and the users who love those to form their relationship, again, without giving control of data and money to the social platform.
Right, which is what's been controlling it so far.
Yeah, exactly. So I know I was kind of vague in my answers to that, but it's something we are definitely working on.
Okay, and I know you can't give me all the answers, which is all totally fine.
Yeah,
but I'm going to keep asking these questions because I'm passionate about it.
Questions, that's like the next piece of
Yeah, I'm sure.
Right? Yeah.
I'm sure. So one of the things, obviously, that's for a lot of people, a platform of owning NFTs and the functionality, et cetera, seems complicated when all they want to do is sit down and watch Schitt's Creek, right?
Exactly. That's a much easier answer. Right?
Okay. But before we get into that, right now, obviously there's a battle between all these streaming networks are barely making any money, or they're things are not working out as financially as possible as they thought it was. Yeah. And so a lot of platforms and distribution people are looking at fast networks, right?
Yes.
Which are free ad supported television.
But they're not personalized. Again, you have no way to control what's coming to you. Guess what? You should ask me what I am working on in this.
What are you working on?
That very problem, right? Which gets to your last question, is in this whole point about discoverability and getting the economics into people wanting to be with this kind of content. One of the big drivers is what you're seeing, right?
Right.
And one of the big limitations, advertising is an important part of the monetization, but one of the big downfalls, of course, you can't really personalize in the old way at scale. One great thing about the fabric is you can personalize infinitely without the cost that you normally would, right? And then you can also add algorithms to that. And that is something that we're doing in live streaming content right now. Exactly, right? And two, I think that kind of goes together with exactly this whole theme we're talking about, is when you start to see the bulk of content shifting this way, then you start to see new monetization that's both, getting the content to the user that they really want and is truly personalizable and is so dynamic that it reacts to the circumstances, right? And and I don't mean hypothetically. I mean, we're in a game and there's the game is really close and there's growing crowds, so there's an opportunity to reach a lot more people. And then furthermore, we know from the wallet graphs what certain people might actually like based on what they've gotten before. And then you've got this pool of content, so you can add an insertion point to the stream, running stream dynamically, and then you can bind in content from that pool of content that is actually going to match up with the wallet watchers based on what they have shown that they're interested in, right? And you can do that without having to retranscode the content and push it out to the CDN. You do it on the fly in the network, right? That's how the fabric works. That's an application we are working on right now, actually. So Yeah, to your point. Sorry, I got very excited about that, but
I love that you're excited about it. This is great.
It is great. It is really great. But I think that's kind of foundation to your overall question of, okay, so how do we really put this all together so that there could be a meaningful shift off of what has been the YouTube environment, right?
Well, I don't even own my TV anymore. You know what I mean?
Well, and I think the difference when we say, and I think the key with ownership psychologically isn't the mechanic of, necessarily that you care that you carry the deed to your TV. It's that sense of identity
that's what I get. They own my identity. They watch everything I watch, right? Roku costs $40 because they're watching everything I'm watching, right? And so I don't necessarily want that feeling anymore, and be nice. One of the things that got me the most excited about, owning your own identity on a Web3 blockchain sounds much nicer. My wallet is my wallet.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and one thing that that's actually real. And I do deal with our what we call tenants, but our clients, users, media companies using our platform all the time about this is that it's a fantastic paradigm for, I think, what we're trying to get to, which is that, your transactionality is transparent. It's clear what your wallet is doing, but your identity in relation to your wallet is under your control. You don't have to identify with your wallet at all if you don't want to, right? Or you can bind your email address directly to it. And I think that's what puts this back in the hands of the consumer in a way that answers so many of the privacy concerns. And it works really well too, because you don't have to worry about the leak. I mean, I can tell you, I always, being an engineer, I have to answer all these security questionnaires about where's the data, who's got access to it, right? And one of the great things about this kind of technology is that you can know what's going on and have good truth in the data without having to compromise people's identities or private information. Together, they are not conflated. So I think that's.
Do you think it will get to a point where it becomes much easier and much simpler, where people can think about it? Because right now it does feel complicated.
Yeah. So one thing, in sounds like an Eluvio commercial, but the reality is when you sign on to your media wallet, right, you don't have the friction you have with trying to do something difficult with a crypto wallet and wait for mints to happen, right? That doesn't happen. And then you mentioned like a lean back experience, again, without getting into a lot of detail. Maybe we can have another chat in a couple of months, right? Because the content authorization and the ownership is really just a matter of the basic security primitives, right? If those are right, you can put those into all the environments that people are used to enjoying for entertainment, right? So it doesn't just have to be on your laptop, for example, right? And you don't have to be always connecting to, 3 or 4 external wallets, right? You can, as long as the signer for your wallet transactions is somewhere that is secure and that you can prove to it who you are, then you can have good transaction signing that makes it feel like any other kind of login. That's what we do. And then we're able to combine that with the content to make it easy on people. And then I think the next generation of this is that you're going to carry around your keys. I think this is obvious. I'm not saying anything that's that, sort of forward looking, but private keys are going to be built into your phone.
They're already starting to do that.
Right? And so this whole idea of worrying about whether you're using MetaMask or Rainbow or any other, signing wallet's just going to fall away, because all that really happens, this is where I think people overthink it, right? All that really happens in those transactions is that you bear a key, which you use to cryptographically sign on your behalf. Just like in the real world, you sign with a digital signature. The point is the cryptography, right, is where all the juice is. The key, right, of course, is a fundamental piece of data in that. But once you're there, that constitutes a way to, sort of unlock what we think of as all of these wallet operations. And then the rest is seamless, right? So what I'm saying is that we could have a really, really simple experience that just constitutes signing the transaction. First of all, authenticating myself, who am I, and signing a transaction. That's really all that needs to get done.
Yeah. And what are you guys built on Ethereum or?
Yes. So the Content Fabric Protocol,
Sure.
it incorporates. It's really interesting. It's both content and blockchain. And if
Okay.
you look inside of it, if you were able to peer inside of the software, you would
Yeah.
see that it has a full stack Ethereum blockchain implementation.
And there's a layer 2 on top of it,
Right.
I'm assuming.
Well, it's actually full stack. So we
Okay.
took a fork of Ethereum and actually built it into the protocol. So it's you would think of it that way as full layer 1, but it's application specific.
Okay.
Because what the blockchain protocol does in the fabric, right, as a content protocol, is allow us to implement the content lifecycle. That is the committing of new versions, right, and including their version hashes, the authorization of accessing and reading content, right?
Sure.
And so basically, it's a full stack Ethereum blockchain that is also a content protocol doing these things for content, right? And one other thing I would say is, why do we use the Ethereum source code base? Well, a couple. One is it's the most mature, and we started this, at least at that time, it was the most mature. We made the first version of the protocol in 2018, right? So this was when Ethereum was really the only option. One thing we have done that will put this into context is we have implemented a version of the Content Fabric Protocol, and we have a running test net that's actually built on Polkadot Substrate, which is a whole new blockchain stack.
Yes.
And the protocol, interestingly, the top layer contracts interface for the objects is all still EVM based, right? Because that's what the whole world is used to. But the implementation in the actual Content Fabric daemon is actually on Substrate, which is a vastly more scalable proof of stake based blockchain protocol.
And you're using proof of stake, and Ethereum is also all proof of stake at this point.
It is, but one of the great differences in the Substrate architecture is the scalability of the transaction throughput. It's it's 3 orders of magnitude beyond what
low latency.
Any of the consensus protocols in the mainline Ethereum base have achieved yet. And I think we've found, there are applications like, for instance, imagine large scale publishing where, transactions on chain, right? And if those are not state channel style transactions, but if they're settled directly on chain, right, you need extraordinary transaction throughput to really do that at the scale of mass internet publishing, right? And one of the great things is that the Substrate core allows for that, right? And as always happens with technology, blockchains keep advancing. So right now, that is the state of the art. And I think we've done a good job as a content protocol company and engineering group in making sure that our architecture can be implemented on multiple different blockchain stacks. So our mainnet today is a full stack Ethereum based chain. Mainnet 955.305. It has all the RPC interfaces are fully EVM based and would feel like mainnet Ethereum. The Ethereum mainnet to anyone who uses it. In fact, our registration on Chainlink actually looks just like mainnet Ethereum, and you can interact and do all the contract functions you would on mainnet Ethereum. And then the next testnet has the same EVM interface, but is built on Substrate as its core. Right. So this is I think this is interesting information for people to see, and I'm sure we'll keep in that direction as we keep going. Right.
So all the videos on your site, those are all playing off of this.
The fabric.
Fabric, so right?
The thing is, when you look at all the sites delivered, all the video, even the websites, all that stuff comes from the Fabric as a DApp platform. There's no Akamai, no Fastly, no Amazon. That's it. Right.
That's pretty impressive.
We serve everything.
And it plays really fast.
Yes, it does play really fast. It's part of the protocol's job.
I know. That's what I want to make sure people realize that.
We do also serve the websites too. So one of the cool things is and for blockchain people who know the idea of DApp platforms, right? All that you are experiencing there in the application is a single page app, right? Or if you're on a connected TV, a TV app that's talking directly to the Fabric, and it's serving you everything, right? There's no database layer, so to speak, right?
Gotcha.
You do have an API layer that for some of the marketplace functions and whatnot, that has a database layer that itself talks to the fabric, no doubt. I mean, that's probably expected, right? But behind everything is just that, right? And most importantly, I think we might be the only people doing a application stack of this degree that's truly decentralized, and it doesn't sit on top of AWS, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think that's kind of amazing. What about just even the encoding? Are you just using a standard encoding?
So boy, these are so many good stories in all this, right? So I don't think a person would attempt something as ambitious as this technology earlier in their career. I mean, all of us, or I guess old enough when we started this, we thought, okay, we're just going to go for it. We built a native video stack, and it's inside of the QFab protocol, using the AV libs like you would use in any of the FFmpeg-based projects.
Okay.
But we built that natively rather than, bolting on some existing video stack, right?
Okay.
Including FFmpeg itself, right? We didn't do that. Right. Instead, we built this into the QFab protocol, and that actually runs on all the nodes. And so all the audio video encoding on playout from, both the ingest encoding, right, which creates the parts that sit around on the nodes, and then the playout, which transcodes the parts and generates the manifests and the playable dash and HLS segments and all of that, that all happens directly in that AV pipe layer within QFab. And it does happen on demand upon request. All the nodes can do it, which makes it fully decentralized.
And all these nodes are just scattered all over the...
Yeah, they are. One thing I would say is less like SETI at home and more like a blockchain network, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. It's like
That's right. That's right. And then the nodes have IP bandwidth, right? So they're audience facing and have a good amount of bandwidth. And then obviously we would like ever more node providers. So anybody interested in adding nodes to our network, please contact us. We're always excited about that. And then
node providers also get paid too, right?
That's exactly right. I think that this scale that we're at now is really sort of moving to the next level where you've probably seen some of our business partnerships are with telcos that can offer ever more bandwidth and node horsepower, because when you want to go beyond, say, 1 million concurrent streams to something like 10 million, which are these bigger sort of live concurrent events like Super Bowl, you need even more capacity than the present Fabric has. So we've really been working on that. So.
And based on your latency, what about live events like the Super Bowl?
Yeah. Well, so the great thing, live end to end runs really well, and is, this is one of the great parts of the real-time video. It's less than 5 seconds end to end everywhere you try to play out, from ingest to the client, without having to do heavy lifting with low latency sorts of protocols. We do use fragmented MP4 segments, which are the state of the art in terms of MPEG encoding, and dash pack or CMAP packaging for dash and HLS. So that increases efficiency, but the rest is all the fabric and the pipelining that helps that to be true. So it's low latency for everybody, is the bottom line. And you don't have to, the thing I know from, video engineering side that's rather important is you don't have to do brute force heavy lifting to get that. What I mean is that people don't necessarily realize that a lot of the low latency live streaming today is incredibly brute force in terms of how it's being accomplished. It's extremely costly. And in the Fabric, what I described is the inherent performance, without, throwing machines at the problem, or, without having to implement a new kind of custom protocol between the CDN and the origin servers, which is with other downsides, which is what goes on in a lot of the low latency video community.
Yeah. Well, that's very exciting. I'm very excited about the Content Fabric Protocol. I think what you guys are doing is really cool.
Thanks.
And I'm sure you're very tired and your brain is kind of mushy from all the Superman stuff that's about to happen.
I was going to say, sorry if I was a little slow today, but hopefully.
Oh, you're definitely not slow. I'll tell you that. But no, I'm very excited about content. And just the proof that you have studios like Warner Brothers that are looking at you and coming back to you, proves that I think you guys are doing something really fantastic.
Well, more power to the creators, right? In the end, all this stuff is just means to the end, right? So we're excited, and hopefully hopefully everything will go well on this launch, and then there'll be other movies to watch out for the rest of the year.
Absolutely. And I think that, having gone to your site, it seems like it would be very straightforward if you want to be an independent filmmaker and be able to use your platform
Try to do it. Absolutely.
As a form of distribution. So that is sort of and it is basically a turnkey system from what I saw.
Yeah. Yes. I think that everybody who has used it has successfully gotten to where they're trying to go. And I think you nailed it, Chris. The next wave is discovery.
Right.
The technology works and it is turnkey. The thing we have to do as a group is get all of the innovation right to put the ecosystem together. That's right. The real point.
And then once discovery happens, then people are then hopefully will word.
It's another, it's a totally different plane, right?
Right.
But that's a tall order. Many factors in it, and you asked fantastic questions. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for being on, and looking forward to seeing Superman, and also looking forward to seeing all the new innovations you guys are going to have in the next few months.
Thanks you very much. I appreciate your time.